After winning 100 million in the lottery, I decided to resign from my job and return home. As soon as I reached the door, I heard my brother's wife, Zoe, saying, "Mom, I want to buy a mansion. Tell Kate Jones to pay the down payment." My mother replied, "She just finished paying off the mortgage on this house last week. She probably doesn't have any money." Zoe scoffed, "Did you forget? Jin likes her. Get her to be with him and then ask for $1 million for the down payment." My father added, "That's a good idea. Then the mansion will be my grandson's wedding house." Zoe commented, "By the way, Mom and Dad, when Kate comes back, tell her to move out. My brother is going to live in her room." It was the first time I had ever heard such a conversation. I never expected such ingratitude. I lifted my head and held back my tears, feeling bitter. The draft in the hallway made me shiver. I stood outside the door for a long time before taking a deep breath and opening it. "I've told you many times to be more careful when entering." Zoe looked at me with disdain and then turned to my parents, winking at them. My father asked coldly, "Why are you back so early? Didn't you say you were working overtime today?" "I was fired," I replied expressionlessly. Everyone was shocked. My brother, David, was the first to react. "What? Why were you fired?" "It was because you offended Jin by rejecting him." Jin Wood was my direct boss. He was petty, strict, and difficult to deal with. During the years I worked for him, the pressure was so intense that I suffered from frequent insomnia and hair loss. Every time I complained to my family, they always scolded me, saying I was exaggerating. After a while, I stopped telling them anything. I didn't want to talk to them anymore. I turned to go to my room, but my mother stopped me. When she heard I was unemployed, her expression immediately changed, and she said bluntly, "Pack your things and move out tomorrow. Zoe's brother will be living here. Why should I give up my room for him? I bought this house. I'm not leaving." My father was furious. "What do you mean by that? You have to move out." Zoe took advantage of the situation and added, "That's right. Just because you paid for the house, you think you own it? You're going to get married sooner or later and move out. I'm warning you. Don't even think about it." David dragged my suitcase out of my room and pushed it toward me. "It's already decided. We're just informing you. Stop talking nonsense and leave." My parents had always looked down on me since I was born. David used to be kind to me, but ever since he got married, he changed completely and did whatever Zoe said. Zoe had always been cold toward me, taking out her bad moods on me. My parents and David always turned a blind eye, and no one ever took my side. I thought we were family, that if I was good enough, they would change their attitude. I worked hard to earn money and buy this big house, but in the end, I became the most disposable person. "This house is mine. I'm not moving out." After saying that, I dragged my suitcase back to my room, took my clothes out, and hung them back in the closet one by one. Zoe said sarcastically, "Mom and Dad, look, your daughter has grown so much that she doesn't care about anyone anymore." My father, enraged, tried to slap me, but I grabbed his arm, stopping him in his tracks. "Dad, don't be angry. Just tell me what I said that was wrong." Zoe shouted, "You're completely wrong. This is the Jones family's house. You should obey your parents." My mother came to calm my father and complained in a low voice, "Kate, I don't want to blame you, but we just want you to move out for a few days. Why are you making such a big fuss?" "A few days, Mom? Don't think I don't know. Zoe just got her brother a new job, so he plans to stay for a long time. This is my house. Why should I give it up to strangers?" "Strangers like Zoe's brother? He may be a stranger, but since I married David, he's also your family. You should treat him like a brother." Zoe waved her arms as she spoke, agitated. "Treat him like my brother? Ridiculous." It was one thing for my parents, David, and Zoe to take advantage of my money, but why should I spend money on Zoe's lazy brother? They really thought I was an idiot. "Zoe, you're really shameless. My parents won't even give me the key to that small house I bought earlier. It's true that your parents are living there, isn't it? So what?" Zoe replied arrogantly. My parents and brother just stood by, showing no intention of stopping her. I looked at each of them. You're all determined to kick me out, aren't you? Zoe gritted her teeth and said, "Yes. You're not going to take back those 2 houses, are you?" My father glared at me. "Nonsense. Don't even think for a second that those houses belong to you. It's not your decision. We'll see." I felt desperate, and suddenly, I didn't want to stay there another minute. I didn't want to waste any more time arguing with them. It was a small problem that could be solved by hiring a lawyer. I took nothing with me and left the house. That suitcase had been thrown out by David, and the old clothes had been given to me by Zoe because she no longer wanted them. I didn't want them either. After moving into the best 5-star hotel in the city, I consulted the best lawyer. I had already paid the down payment and mortgage on the houses. The lawyer told me that recovering what was rightfully mine wouldn't be difficult. After hanging up the phone, I felt a wave of depression and irritation. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. My parents had always favored David because he was the man of the house. If it weren't for my grandparents, who paid for my education, I wouldn't even have finished high school. After being accepted into university, I worked up to 4 jobs at once, sometimes so exhausted that I would fall asleep standing up. After graduating, I got a full-time job during the day and a part-time job at a fast food restaurant at night. I worked hard for years, saving every penny, and finally managed to move my parents and David out of my grandparents' old house. I thought that by buying the 2 houses, life would be easier and more comfortable. But unexpectedly, I was kicked out overnight just because I lost my job. They turned their backs on me completely. How ridiculous! Family love could disappear in an instant. But at least I was lucky in another aspect. I looked at my bank balance and couldn't help but smile. I still had $100 million, an amount I wouldn't be able to spend in 10 lifetimes. I bought a mansion with a sea view in a luxury area. Now, I woke up whenever I wanted, did yoga, and watched TV. Life was extremely comfortable. There was a homeowners group in the mansion community. After joining the group, everyone welcomed me warmly. They were all wealthy women, and every day, they talked about makeup, clothes, and similar topics. I never used to be interested in these things, but now, with money in the bank, I told myself that I should indulge and enjoy life. So, I enthusiastically joined their conversations. Within a few days, I made friends with them, and we often arranged shopping trips together. We were in a luxury store with my new friends when suddenly my father called me, furious. "You ungrateful brat! You sued us! The court summons arrived, and the neighbors are mocking us. You're an ingrate! If I had known you'd turn out like this, I should have strangled you at birth." My mother took the phone and started crying hysterically. "We just had a few arguments. Why do you have to make such a big deal out of it? Now we're so embarrassed in the community, they almost believe we treated you badly." I couldn't help but let out a sarcastic laugh. It wasn't almost. They had treated me badly. And now, they had even kicked me out of my own house. Since childhood, I always had endless housework to do as soon as I got home, but I never minded because we were family. However, after David got married, and especially after they had a baby, I had even more responsibilities, and I became more and more exhausted. No matter how kind I was to them, my parents and Zoe were never satisfied. They truly treated me like a free maid. My friends used to joke, saying that I must have owed them a debt from a past life, which was why I was working like a slave to repay it. I could only smile bitterly. "Kate, we gave you life and raised you. That's a great favor. What more do you want?" "I want nothing but justice." After saying that, I hung up the phone. My friends and I continued enjoying our shopping trip. Just as we were about to leave the mall, I saw Zoe walking toward me, laughing and chatting with a middle-aged man. They looked like a couple in love. When Zoe saw me, she panicked and quickly distanced herself from the man. "Kate, are you spying on me? I didn't expect you to be this kind of person. Why don't you go look for a job instead of following me around?" Seeing her guilty expression, I wasn't angry. I just laughed. "I'm in no rush to find a job, and I'm definitely not interested in following you. Who do you think you are?" At that moment, my friend Mary couldn't hold back. "Who is this woman, Kate?" "She's my brother's wife," I replied. Mary immediately recognized the man. Benham Cox. You're meeting up with a married woman? Aren't you afraid your wife will find out? Zoe rolled her eyes and lied. I'm not her brother's wife. She's talking nonsense. I'm just Benham's employee. Our relationship isn't what you think. Don't get the wrong idea. Benham also waved his hands, desperately trying to distance himself from the situation. Zoe threatened me. Kate, I'm warning you, if you tell David, I'll rip your tongue out. Just at that moment, David appeared. He had come shopping with his boss and, seeing us arguing from a distance, rushed over. Kate, I'm warning you, don't upset Zoe. She's pregnant with our second child. If it's a boy, it'll be a great contribution to our family. Family, I thought. Since the day they kicked me out, I no longer had anything to do with them. David's expression changed immediately. That's not for you to decide. You're so stupid. Even if you win the lawsuit against our parents, you'll still have to pay them alimony. Either way, both houses are ours, so the alimony is nothing to us. At the mention of the houses, Zoe lost control. Those 2 houses are ours. Don't think you're going to keep them. Zoe had always been irrational. I had worked hard to buy those houses, and now I was just reclaiming what was mine. I had hired a lawyer and would soon have them back. I told them they should go home and start packing their things, taking the time to think about where they would live in the future. Zoe was so furious that her face turned red. She turned and slapped David. You're just going to let Kate humiliate me like this? What is wrong with you? David then tried to attack me, but my friends immediately surrounded him and stopped him. Van, another of my friends, looked at Zoe with disdain and said, Why don't you take your husband and leave? You can't afford to cause trouble with these women. We all live in the mansion community. Zoe looked at me in shock. How did you join them? Are you working as their maid? Mary, my friend, shot her a glare and replied with contempt, Maid? Kate is our neighbor. Did you rent a mansion? Where did you get the money? Did you secretly marry David, and he gave you money? Zoe asked incredulously, but Mary laughed sarcastically. Kate's mansion isn't rented. She bought it outright. David and Zoe were stunned. What? As they stood there, paralyzed by the realization that I had bought the mansion in cash, I felt an indescribable pleasure running through my veins. But it still wasn't enough. They deserved more than just shock. They deserved to feel the weight of the contempt I had carried for years. With a smile that mixed scorn and superiority, I turned to my friends and said, Let's go, girls. I think I've wasted enough time on people who aren't worth it. As we started walking away, I heard David's voice tremble with rage. Kate, do you really think you're going to get away with this? You have nothing. Those houses are ours, and I swear to God, you'll end up alone, begging, just like you always should have been. There's no point in pretending you're in a better position now, because you're not. You've always been dead weight. I stopped in my tracks and looked at him from afar, a mix of pity and disdain in my eyes. David, do you really think you're going to walk away from this as the victim? You're married to a woman who lies, cheats, and manipulates, and you still fool yourself into thinking you're better than me. Zoe treats you like a puppet, and we all know it. You know what's funny? Even with all our parents' support, even as their golden child, you never managed to build anything for yourself. I bought the houses. I paid for the comfortable life you're living. And now, when the ground starts shaking beneath your feet, all you can do is threaten me. How pathetic. David was speechless, but Zoe, furious, lunged at me, her face twisted with rage. You think you're better than us, don't you? Just because you got lucky and won the lottery. You're a loser, Kate. You always were and always will be. Nothing will change the fact that you're just a bitter, lonely woman with no one. I took a deep breath, and for a moment, I considered letting her continue with her insults. But then I realized I had endured enough for a lifetime. I stepped close enough for her to see the determination in my eyes. With a voice controlled but dripping with contempt, I responded, I may be single, Zoe, but at least I'm free. Free from a miserable marriage with a man who treats me like trash, and from a family that never valued me. And look at you, you're trapped in a life built on lies, manipulation, and betrayal. You think you have control, but in reality, you're just a prisoner of your own actions. Keep threatening me. Keep deluding yourself. In the end, the one who will end up alone is you." Before Zoe could respond, one of my friends, Mary, stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Kate, don't waste your time on these people. Let's go." As we stood on the balcony of my new mansion, the sea breeze brushed against my face, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace. And yet, something inside me was still unsettled. I knew the legal battle would be settled, that I would reclaim the houses, but that was no longer enough. They needed to learn the hard way that I was no longer the naive girl they could control. The next morning, I called my lawyer and asked him to speed up the lawsuits against my parents and my brother. Within a few days, subpoenas arrived at their doors, and soon, I saw them squirming under the weight of justice. But this was just the beginning. I hired private investigators to track Zoe and David's every move. I knew Zoe had more to hide than just that meeting with Ben Cox, and I wanted all the evidence possible. It didn't take long before I got the results. Zoe wasn't just cheating on David with Ben. She was also seeing another man. Worse, she was siphoning money from their joint account to fund her own luxuries. When this information reached me, I knew it was time to use it against them. I arranged a reconciliation dinner with my family, sending formal invitations for them to meet me at a high-end restaurant. I knew they would come. Their curiosity and fear of losing any chance to turn the situation around would lead them straight to me. On the night of the dinner, I put on my best dress, the one that exuded power and control, and prepared for the show. When my parents, David and Zoe, arrived, their faces were tense, filled with anticipation. Zoe looked particularly nervous, which only made me smile on the inside. They sat at the table, and I began to speak calmly. "I've thought a lot about everything that happened between us, and I've come to the conclusion that maybe you were right. Maybe I overreacted a little." I saw relief flash in their eyes, especially in David's, who immediately tried to seize the moment. "See, I knew you'd understand, Kate. We're family, and we shouldn't be fighting like this." Deep down, I knew you understood what was right. I almost laughed out loud but held back. Instead, I looked straight into Zoe's eyes and, with a cold smile, slid an envelope across the table. "Before you continue, you might want to take a look at this." Zoe hesitated but took the envelope. As she opened it and flipped through the photos and documents exposing her affairs and financial fraud, panic spread across her face. David, noticing her reaction, grabbed the photos and stared at them in shock. "What is this, Zoe?" Zoe tried to mumble something, but I cut her off, savoring every second. "This, David, is the real Zoe. Your perfect wife, the mother of your second child, cheating on you with more than one man and stealing money from you. And before you even think about attacking her, just know, I've already sent copies of everything to your boss and all your friends." David went pale, his hands shaking as he dropped the photos onto the table. Zoe, desperate, started crying and pleading, but no one was paying attention anymore. I turned to my parents and added, "And as for you two, you'll soon receive a court order to vacate my houses. Enjoy these last few days." I stood up, tossing the bill onto the table, and as I walked away, the sound of their panicked and desperate voices echoed through the restaurant. After my victory in court and the recovery of both houses, I realized there was still more to be done. Winning 100 million in the lottery had given me much more than just comfort. It had given me power, and above all, options. I decided that simply reclaiming what was mine wasn't enough. Now was the time to plan my next move, and nothing seemed more satisfying than investing in real estate. After all, in the city where I had lived for so long, the demand for good properties was rising, and I had more than enough money to take advantage of it. I contacted a prestigious real estate agency in the area and started acquiring properties. Little by little, discreetly, without raising suspicion. My goal was clear: to expand my influence in the local real estate market without anyone knowing I was behind the purchases. I acquired houses, apartments, and small commercial buildings, all in valuable and strategic areas. Each new investment increased my portfolio, and my presence in the local market grew silently. About 3 months after my parents were forced to vacate the house I had reclaimed, I received news that made me laugh for hours. Apparently, they were facing financial difficulties. David was completely ruined after the scandal with Zoe and unable to help them. My parents had been forced to look for a new place to rent. Out of all the options in the area, they ended up interested in a house that, coincidentally, was managed by the real estate agency handling my properties. Without knowing who the true owner was, they signed the lease agreement with the agency and, without a clue, moved into one of the houses I had bought using part of the 100 million I had won. Fate had taken care of delivering the revenge I didn't even need to fully orchestrate. When I received the notification of the first rent deposit in my account, I couldn't suppress a malicious smile. My parents, who had thrown me out of my own home and treated me as a burden my entire life, were now unknowingly paying rent directly to me. The irony of it all was so delicious that it felt unreal. They, who always thought they were in control, now depended on me for a roof over their heads. And the best part? They had no idea. Weeks passed, and I continued receiving the deposits punctually. My other properties were also generating excellent income, and I felt increasingly satisfied. Life was finally returning everything I deserved, and my parents didn't even realize how fate had taken it upon itself to settle the score. It was a feeling of silent justice, one where I didn't have to get my hands dirty directly. One day, I received a call from the real estate agency. The agent, with a polite tone, informed me that the tenants of one of my houses, the one where my parents were living, wanted to discuss a possible rent reduction, citing financial difficulties. It was the cherry on top. My parents were struggling and needed help, but this time, I was the one in control. I scheduled a meeting, without revealing who I was, of course. When my parents arrived at the agency's office, I was placed in a private room where I could watch them through the security camera. It was almost surreal to see them there, sitting humbly, trying to negotiate. My father, who had always carried an unshakable pride, now sat with his head down. My mother, who had hysterically cried over the phone months ago, now spoke in a pleading tone. "It's really impossible to keep up with this rent. Couldn't the owner lower it just a little?" My father asked the agent, visibly embarrassed. I could have easily agreed and allowed them to pay less, but why should I make things easier? They had never made things easy for me when I needed them most. I decided that the rent would remain exactly the same. The agent politely relayed the decision, and upon hearing the response, my father looked visibly frustrated. My mother started crying. Watching that scene, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me still had that old impulse to please them, to be seen as a good daughter. But that version of Kate was long gone. Now, I was a woman who made cold, calculated decisions, and in that moment, the right decision was to let them feel the full weight of the consequences of their actions. I left the room silently, unnoticed by them, and returned to my mansion. The money would continue flowing into my account every month, and even though they didn't know it, my parents were now trapped in a cycle where I was the master of their fate. They had lost all power over me, and the ultimate irony was that while they believed they were free of me, they were, in reality, living under my roof. I controlled everything, even from a distance, and that gave me a sense of silent justice that no direct confrontation could ever provide. Fate had, indeed, carried out the revenge for me. My only role was to watch.